Всем привет! Сегодня у нас будет необычный выпуск, потому что он будет на английском. По крайней мере, мы попытаемся это сделать так.
Ох, мне уже стыдно за эту попытку.
Мне тоже за него стыдно, но я думаю, что...
Зато честно.
Я надеюсь, что дорогие зрители будут снисходительны к нам, потому что мы в основном будем молчать, а разговаривать будет наш гость Шон Эндрю Мюррей, как мы и обещали. И если у вас есть какие-то вопросы, пожелания, если вы хотите передать привет, пишите в комментарии. За комментариями у нас сегодня сидит Александр.
Он будет переводить вопросы, мы будем переводить их Шону, а также Александр будет переводить ответы.
И с этого момента мы переходим на английский, иначе наш гость заскучает.
Да, пожалуй.
So, hello everyone.
Again,
we would like to introduce you our guest, Shon Andrew Murrey, who will tell about himself a little bit. Hello, Shon. Do you hear us?
Hello.
Yeah?
Yes, I can hear you.
can you tell just a couple of words about yourself?
My name is Shon Andrew Murrey, and I'm an illustrator and a concept artist. I've worked in the video game and film and television animation industry. I continue to do freelance work, but lately my biggest passion has been developing my own world-building project called Gateway, which I'm assuming most listening are familiar with at this point. And like I said, it's a passion project, something I've been working on for many years, and I'm hoping I will probably be working on, till my dying breath.
So we had about a week and a half to gather some questions for you from our audience. From your fans, so now we will try to ask these questions and you will answer and we'll have some kind of conversation.
Yeah, it'll be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. So you, okay?
Yeah. The first question is from Franny Hofield, and she asks about how was the idea of Gateway setting was born? What were the main source of inspiration?
Years and years ago, I was on a road trip with some friends. And like many of you, one of my pastimes was playing role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, GURPS, what's the other one I'm trying to remember? Rifts were some of our favorites. And my friend Dave and I, we're just talking about what we think would be a cool setting for a game. And, I had this idea about a giant city that was sort of this setting for fantasy adventures. And the reason that I wanted to do like an urban setting was because I grew up loving all fantasy stuff, like, reading Lord of the Rings, Dragonlance, Dungeons and Dragons, Forgotten Realms, all of that stuff. I was in love with it. I read the books and I was very passionate about fantasy. However, I also, as a kid, was heavily influenced by Star Wars. And Star Wars, to me, was more exciting when it came to all the different creatures and people and just the diversity of the settings. And I felt like all the fantasy stuff that I was reading kind of had very similar settings and creatures and people. It was always the dwarves and elves and gnomes and dragons and these sort of vast landscapes with little villages and a castle here and there. And I wanted to create a new context for fantasy. Now, at this point, doing an urban fantasy isn't really like, a brand new idea. Lots of people have had this same thought. However, for me, being a passion project, being a personal project, I'm always trying to draw from my own influences, my own experiences, traveling, the places that I've lived, the cities that I've lived in or visited. So it's all started from that one road trip. This was like maybe when I was in college, and over the years, I think I just started drawing this world in my sketchbooks. And it wasn't until 2012 when I did the first Kickstarter for the first version of the book of Wizards that it really all solidified into the project that it is now.
So it sounds like a great story.
Yes.
I mean, actually, to tell you the truth, there's one other thing, and it was kind of it was something that happened on one particular day, and it was shortly after my son was born. We used to take him. We lived in Baltimore at the time. We used to take him to an aquarium, and because he loved looking at all the fish in the tanks. And I was marveling at this sort of the diversity of all the fish, and there's different colors and shapes and sizes and all this stuff. And then we went home, put him down to sleep, and we started watching a Harry Potter movie. And it struck me that all the wizards in the Harry Potter movie kind of looked the same. They were just sort of, you humans with gray or black robes, and I thought, boy, what if this scene with all these wizards hanging out in this alleyway was more colorful and more diverse? And that's actually how I created the image that's on the cover of the book.
This was the reason why you called your company as Fish Wizard Press?
Yeah, and actually, so the first Fish Wizard, the character in the book, Cardinal Birnbauer, was a piece that I had done, I think, in 2008, I want to say, as part of a contest, an online contest. Oh man, I'm going to forget what it was called. It was an online digital art contest that was popular for a few years, and it'll come to me later, but it was a 3D and 2D digital art contest. You had to design a character, and I think I won 11th place for that piece. But he sort of, everybody was sort of like saying they thought it was a really unique character, and so I was thinking, oh, what if I had this whole world full of these half men, half fish characters, and so it just became sort of an icon of the Gateway world. Even though there's tons of different creatures, they're kind of an iconic, and I like to think that the way I design half men, half fish is a little bit different than the way other people do. We've seen Shape of Water and that fish man, and and the Swamp Thing and other, fishmen from Dungeons and Dragons. I go for the more full-on, straight up fish head on top of a human body. So
it's the most beautiful, deep one.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there is one question from us. What do you like most about the Gateway setting? What is your favorite part of it?
To me, it's the thing it's what makes cities exciting, is this idea that wherever you go, no matter what corner you turn, there's a new story around every corner. When I lived in New York City, I was amazed at how you could just walk, 10 blocks and happen upon all these different events, or a parade or a gathering or something that was going on. There was just this energy of thousands of stories swirling around you at all times. And that's what is exciting about Gateway, is that there's so much potential for new stories and new places and settings and corners and alleyways. And what I think is so neat about cities is the layering of time, and to have a setting for a series of fantasy stories where you get a sense of that layering, you get a sense of that history, and a sense of that energy, of endless possibilities. I don't know. I just find that exciting because, I've always imagined Gateway as not just my own project, but a place where other people can explore their ideas as well. And so, that to me it's sort of exciting, the idea of going on the adventures myself, right? Every time I draw something, every time I start a new image for Gateway, it's like I'm starting a new adventure, and I'm not always sure where I'm going to end up, and the places I'm going to discover. So it's a bit esoteric, I guess, but that's kind of what I find to be exciting about Gateway.
I have several questions from Franny Holfield. And
Again.
yes, and she would like to know, like lots of other people from our audience would like to know, who is your favorite wizard? What is your favorite guild or order, or well?
Yeah, I think right now, I'd say mainly because he was one of the first characters that I designed specifically for the world. Cardinal Birnbauer is my favorite, and he was the original fish wizard, I guess. I've been thinking about a storyline for him, for a short graphic novel, and I'm not certain if I'm going to be the one who draws it, because I'm not sure if that I'm great at drawing graphic novels myself. I kind of like to draw new things each time I set my pencil down. But I at least have the idea in mind for a story that I would like to tell about him. In terms of my favorite guild or group, I was thinking about this before we came on, and I actually think it's the Night Fishermen, the guild of the Ancient Order of the Night Fishermen, who are attempting to capture the sacred and elusive birdfish, which, by the way, I will soon have a collectible based on the elusive birdfish that's going to be coming out later this year, which is kind of exciting. So.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Story of Cardinal Birnbauer was one of the first I read in the Gateway book, and yes, it was a point for me when I totally fall in love in this setting.
Yeah, it's. I was kind of thinking a little bit about. A long time ago, I had this phase where I was really into Western movies, and there's this. I'm trying to remember it. The name of the movie. It was a Clint Eastwood film where he was a priest, but he had given up his priesthood to go back to being a gunslinger, to take revenge on someone. And he'd gone to a safe deposit box and had put his priest collar and everything in the safe deposit box. And I was kind of thinking a little bit about that when I came up with the story for Cardinal Birnbauer.
Okay, and another question from the same person. Your turn.
Okay, if the Gateway City had its own musical theme, what would it sound like?
So, actually, it does have a musical theme, and it was written by a good friend of mine named Chris Velasco, and he is a composer for games and movies. He's worked on God of War and Assassin's Creed, composing music. It's C-R-I-S Velasco. And he wrote a piece of music for me for my last Kickstarter, which is, if you go to YouTube, video that I made for my sketchbook Kickstarter. The music that begins with is kind of the theme song for Gateway. We did it as a trade because I did a big painting of a scene in Gateway, and he's a big collector of original paintings and artwork, and dark art. In fact, every year he organizes a few group shows that I'm occasionally a part of, and so I traded him my piece for the piece of music that he wrote. So you can go and listen to it.
Okay.
Yes, it sounds amazing, and it's something new for us.
We should do it.
Yeah, I can send you the link later, so you can send it out to, unless somebody's able to find it. So.
No, thank you. Well, another
I should have mentioned that beforehand. I apologize. I remember getting that question, and I meant to send the link to you beforehand. So.
Oh, we could use it instead of our horror music. But, okay, it's too late.
I'll have to make, I'll have to make sure. I'm sure it's fine. And I didn't. That's right. I should have let you use that music. But yeah, going forward, we can definitely use it. So.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Franny. How does your work process look like? Do you use any programs, applications? Do you use graphics tablet? Do you use some materials for painting? How does it look?
More traditional art or digital art?
More digital art, yes.
Yeah. So I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm an old guy. I'm nearing my mid-40s. That's a joke. So I learned traditional drawing and painting. I studied illustration at Syracuse University in New York State, and digital painting and digital art was just in its infancy, or at least digital art that was user friendly and meant for a wider market. And initially, I wasn't really interested in it because I didn't. Most of the results that I saw looked like digital art. So I learned traditional painting and drawing skills: acrylic, watercolor, oil painting. But then eventually, over time, when I got into the game design industry, I had to teach myself digital painting and get good at it because it was for time purposes. I mean, however, I've always integrated some traditional methods into my workflow, and mostly in the form of the initial drawings, which are usually always done with pencil. Sometimes I'll do a rough digital sketch, print it out very lightly on paper, and then do a tight line drawing with pencil. I occasionally do some traditional media paintings, acrylic, watercolor. I've recently gotten back into oil painting and still in the experimental phase, although I did sell my first oil painting that I had done since college. I sold it at a convention in China just a couple weeks ago. But I've got more that I'm experimenting with, and I want to do some bigger oil paintings. But that's really generally more for like those group art shows that I was telling you about. In terms of my own preferred workflow for creating new pieces for Gateway and Gateway books, it's usually starting with a pencil drawing and then painting digitally in Photoshop. My digital painting method is based on everything that I learned about traditional painting. So I don't typically use a lot of filters and built-in bells and whistles of Photoshop, though I'm certainly familiar with them. And I also don't use photos like photo bashing. I've done it for like some concept work when time was of the essence, but for my own personal work, I've never found a way to integrate that in a way that's satisfying to me. It's like an artist friend of mine once said, when you use photos, yes, you can make your clouds look like real clouds because you're basing it on a photo. But if I want to make them look like battleships, I can because I'm in control. And instead of the photo material being in control. So, I use photo reference more as a source of inspiration. So I look back at my own photographs that I've taken on, vacations or trips or explorations that I've gone on. And I refer back to them, for inspiration. But I prefer to let the ideas flow in a natural way. And that's why I prefer working in pencil, because it's the most natural way for me to get my ideas directly from my head onto paper.
Okay, Ice and Grim Noel, another person with the question.
Yes, this is the tricky one.
Yeah. When you were working on Gateway, were there some ideas that were nice, but they didn't fit in your setting? And what did you do with these ideas? Have you adopted them in some way for your setting, or have you used them somewhere else?
That's an interesting question. I like that question because occasionally some things make themselves known in my sketchbook or, that initially maybe don't completely fit with the Gateway world. Although I like to think that I've kept the options fairly open because Gateway is such a diverse place with so many different potential settings and scenarios that I've tried to make it hard for myself to find a reason to exclude a good idea from Gateway. But maybe the most, probably the best example of something like that I haven't necessarily found the right way to integrate into Gateway as it is now is stuff that feels more sci-fi, like when occasionally I do something that looks more like a traditional robot or mech or spaceship. However, the way I tend to draw mechanical things, it tends to have more of a naturalistic feel to it anyways. So I kind of imagine like a far future Gateway, like when they start exploring outer space and things like that. Perhaps there's an application for this stuff in a distant future setting. I like to think about the Spelljammer setting for Dungeons and Dragons, which I've always felt was an untapped a gem of a D&D setting. So maybe something sort of like that, but only inspired by the future of Gateway. So that's probably the best example of stuff like, and there's been a few drawings here and there that look more like traditional vehicles. So there may be something there. I've had this concept about doing sort of a future Gateway setting as a follow-up someday, but I still have a lot of work to do on this current version of the setting, so we'll see.
Yeah.
The next questions is
from us.
From us, yes.
So...
And it's not about Gateway or RPGs, it's about your work generally. So,
okay.
What is your part in upcoming Carnival Row show? Карнавальная шумиха это...
Carnival Row?
Yes.
Well, I'll have to start by informing everybody about one of the sometimes unfortunate things about the entertainment world in general, which is that oftentimes you put a lot of work into something and you're not always guaranteed that that work sees the light of day. And by example, there was a video game I worked on years ago that was called, at the time, it was called Crucible. And it was a fantasy RPG, and I was working for a game company, and it was a brand new property that we were inventing from the ground up. And it was a dream project for me because it didn't have necessarily elves and gnomes and dwarves and dragons. And so I could kind of design with the designers and making up this new fantasy world. And I spent 3 years of my life pouring myself creatively into this project, only to have it canceled and dropped like a hot potato, as they say, you know, and then turned around and had to start a new project. And, you know, and I learned a big lesson that time about, you know, that for me, the joy in the work has to be in doing the work itself, because the entertainment industry is inherently chaotic, and they're constantly changing the goalposts and changing priorities from project to project and from day to day or month to month, you know. So in regards to Carnival Row, I'm not sure how much of the work that I did for that project will end up in the final product. I have not been connected to the project for a couple of years, probably 2 years ago. Is the last time I worked on it, doing some creature designs and some character designs. But it all started in, I think, 2014 or 15, when I was hired by Guillermo del Toro and Legendary Pictures at the time. I think Legendary is still the producer. And Guillermo at that time was producing Carnival Row, working directly with the writer, Travis Beecham. And so it was much more of at that point, it was much more of a hands-on Guillermo del Toro. Oh, have we lost the stream? Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Yes, you're right.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's the Inquisition, they're listening.
Okay, no worries. So anyways, over time, Guillermo eventually pulled back from that project to work on other things, namely The Shape of Water, and the production turned over to the writers, and eventually Legendary Pictures finally, you know, found the director that they wanted to direct the series. And I think that director brought in some of his own people to also work on concept art and production. So as far as I know, at this point, I don't have official credit in the show, just because it has changed hands, the producers, so many times. That doesn't mean that, you know, that none of the work that I did would end up in the final product. My hope is that it will, but we'll see. You know, I've only seen snippets of the show at this point from, you know, the previews that I've seen. And I also talked with someone, I met an artist, a fabricator, someone that did some of the costuming and makeup for the show. And she told me that even up to the very end, you know, there were a lot of changes being made. So who knows? I'm certainly excited about the show. I love Travis's project. I worked on another project for Travis, an independent film that he was producing on his own. So you know, I certainly connect with the world that he's created. I mean, it's an urban fantasy. So you know, now it's a different kind of project. It's a different kind of story, and you know, focuses on different kinds of characters and stuff. So I'm not, you know, I certainly hope some of the stuff I worked on makes it, but you know, it's hard to tell. I will tell you this, and this is not, I'm not taking credit for this at all, but when I was working on the project initially, they were planning on filming it in Toronto, and building a lot of sets and sound stages. And I thought to myself, why don't they just film this show in Prague? And sure enough, eventually that's the decision they ended up making, was filming the show in Prague, which made a lot of sense to me. So, I'm excited to see how the show. Oh, and this is funny. The show is coming out on my birthday, August 30th, as well as the new Dark Crystal TV series is coming out on August 30th, my birthday. So I'm not sure which one I'm gonna have to watch both, and my day will be busy, because I'm a big fan of Dark Crystal from way back.
Okay, it sounds really interesting. It's like every show business mess, but interesting.
It's quite chaotic.
No, it is. Yes. Yeah, and I did a lot. I mean, I worked in Toronto for 2 separate periods for about a month at a time, doing character and creature and environment designs. And then a couple of summers I worked doing, sort of remotely from home, doing some character design. So, we'll see. I'm not upset if none of the things I designed end up in the final product. I enjoyed working on it. That's it. That's really the key.
This wasn't your first experience of work with Guillermo del Toro, right?
Well, actually, it was. When he hired me in 2014, that was the first year that I had done San Diego Comic-Con. And was it 2014 or 2015? I think it was 2014. Yeah, I think it was that summer of 2014. And he had come to my booth at San Diego Comic-Con, although I didn't know it was him because he was wearing a mask. He was wearing a luchador mask, and he bought my books, and I didn't know it was him until afterwards. Producer called me or emailed me about a month later and said, "Would you like to come up to Toronto to work on this new project?" I have worked on other things for him, namely the Troll Hunters. I illustrated the book that he co-wrote with. Oh boy, this is embarrassing. I've forgotten the gentleman's name. This is, and by the way, this is, if he's listening or if he hears this, it has nothing to do with him or forgetting who he is. My brain doesn't work always, and my students know this about me, where I kind of lose track for a minute. But anyways, he co-wrote the book. I illustrated it, and they made that story into an animated series for DreamWorks, which they were actually producing at the time I illustrated the book. But I wasn't. He told me he didn't want me to look at what they were doing. He wanted me to sort of design my own way and design the characters my own way. But then eventually, I ended up getting involved in the team that was working on the Troll Hunter series. They used my designs that I had done for the book for a couple of the things in the original series. And then I worked as a concept artist on 3 Below, which is a follow-up to Troll Hunters, and then a couple of other follow-up projects for Troll Hunters since then. And so yeah, that was a lot of fun. But that was, so 2014 was the first time that I had worked for Guillermo.
Well, we have some more questions about your work. For example, about your work with the Wizards of the Coast or Fantasy Flight Games. Could you tell us something about it?
Yeah, well, ever since I graduated from Daniel Kraus, by the way, sorry, the co-writer that wrote the book was Daniel Kraus. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got that in there. Okay, so RPGs. I've actually worked on RPGs since I graduated from college. Shortly after I graduated, I started working for Steve Jackson Games and White Wolf, and in fact, actually, maybe I didn't tell you guys this. I illustrated the, you know, I'm not necessarily asking everybody to go look this up because this was early on in my career, so the quality of the work is not, you know, up to my current standards. But I illustrated the second GURPS role-playing book for Discworld. It was called Discworld also. I illustrated it from cover to cover. But again, like I said, this was early in my career, so don't judge my work based on what I did then. And I had very little time to do 85 or 90 illustrations. But anyway, so then I also did a little bit of work for Wizards of the Coast for a project back then that was called Legend of the Five Rings. It was a card game, which eventually became an RPG. It was bought out by a different company, I believe. They hired me, strangely enough, because I took my portfolio to Dragon Con in Atlanta. This is shortly after I had graduated from college. And the night before I went to the convention, I looked through my portfolio because I knew I was going to be meeting with the art director. And I looked through my portfolio and I realized I didn't have any illustrations in my portfolio that either had a female character or an animal in it. And so that night I drew a picture of a cowgirl riding a horse. And I showed, and it was not a very good drawing, but you know, I put it in there anyways. And I was showing my portfolio to this art director, the guy who was art directing Legend of the Five Rings. And he was going through my portfolio and he stopped on that piece and he stared at it and he goes, I love this drawing of the horse. This is a great horse drawing. I think maybe it was the first time I had ever drawn a horse, or maybe the second time. Anyways, he was so enamored with this horse that I drew that he's like, I want you on this project because I have tons of cards that have horses in them because it's samurai and they're always riding horses and stuff. And I have nobody good to do horses. So I became the horse guy for L5R, the card game. And after a while, it got so ridiculous, I had to beg him to give me like a creature assignment because I was getting so sick of drawing horses. So anyway, so that's kind of a funny story. I did some stuff for Dungeons and Dragons later on, and you know, for some of their books. I can't remember the projects I worked on for White Wolf. It'll come to me later, but a few projects for them. And then I think I've done a couple things for Fantasy Flight. More recently, I've done some Magic cards for the Unstable set for Magic. It's kind of the steampunky, this kind of crazy, funny steampunk world or version of Magic. There are a few cards that I did that, you know, particularly one called Rules Lawyer. That I've gotten a lot of requests for, you know, prints of that piece and stuff like that. But, you know, I certainly enjoy the occasional freelance project in the RPG realm, you know, in the fantasy gaming realm. But, you know, obviously it's you know, it's a nice break every now and then. But my real passion is Gateway, and I'm hoping that eventually I won't have enough time to take freelance because I'm just so busy with Gateway stuff.
Okay.
Horse story.
Horse story
just
is
amazing.
great. Yes.
Yeah, I know, it was so weird. Well, that's the thing is I tell people all the time, young artists who are just starting out, you never know what is going to get you that first job. And so you just have to put yourself out there. You have to take risks. You have to put yourself out there. You have to expect the unexpected. And I mean, same thing with my first job as a concept artist in the video game world. I had applied to 50 or 60 different studios with no response whatsoever until I got a response from one studio. And that was because the art director at the time just connected with my work because I liked line work and he liked line work. He was a line artist as well. And so we just connected on stylistic sort of overlap. And that's the reason I got hired for that when I was working on Lord of the Rings Online for Turbine Games back in the day. And, it was just, like I said, the other 60 studios I had applied to had ignored me entirely. So, these things happen.
So we have a question from Fairvan Gell.
Okay.
Yes, it's about your art book, about your crowdfunding, because in Russia, most bakers are role-playing gamers. What about your crowdfunding of your art book? What was your audience, your bakers? Mostly role-playing gamers or some other people?
Okay, before I answer that question, I noticed in the chat, and I don't know what the person was saying, something about the word cowgirl versus cowgirl. Just make sure I clarify that when I said cowgirl, that like not a cowboy, but a female cowboy, right? Not a girl plus cow combination. Anyways, just making sure that was clear.
Fish wizard, cowgirl, yes.
Right, yeah, exactly. Right. No, I can understand. I understand the confusion. Anyways, in terms of who was the audience for my my original Kickstarter, I'm not sure. I mean, it seems like I certainly had a lot of friends who pledged and family members, of course. But most of the people that, I think over 50% of the people that pledged to the original Kickstarter were people that found the project while they were exploring new projects on Kickstarter. So my guess is that there's probably a healthy amount of gamers. I've certainly had a lot of people that have expressed interest in using Gateway as a setting for their campaigns. And I think another group are people who are just art enthusiasts or fantasy art enthusiasts, and who are interested in finding new material. I think others are just people who are willing to take a chance or maybe are interested in stories. And I've had lots of requests for more narrative-based products from Gateway, which I'm certainly working on that. I've got a collection of short stories that I should have put together a long time ago. It's just a project that's continually been put off, but I have about 8 short stories written by various authors that I'd actually like to make it more like 10 to 12 short stories if possible. But I'm starting to work on putting that together. And I would certainly like to do a graphic novel or 2 or 3. But I'm not personally interested in drawing a graphic novel myself. I've done it before. I find it to be, for me, a tedious art process. That's why I ended up being a concept artist, because essentially with concept art, every time you're drawing something new. And when I'm drawing for Gateway, I generally like to be drawing new material. So I kind of think of myself as the lead concept artist for Gateway. And if I find the right person to do a graphic novel, I have some people in mind. And if I can get funding for it, or if there's enough interest, or if I've got the right story lined up, I would certainly like to do a series of graphic novels based on Gateway. So I don't know. I think it seems like a fairly diverse group of people that are interested in Gateway and funding it. But I guess I could have done more of a survey of like what the people who pledged to the initial Kickstarter were interested in seeing as the next project. But I'm not very good at I'm not very good at sort of setting something up and saying, okay, this is the one thing I'm going to work on for the next project, and and seeing it all the way through the end. For me, it's a little bit more of a what's a good word? It's about a certain flow, right? Like right now, I'm feeling very motivated to finally put together the Gateway travel log, where it's going to focus a lot more on the settings and the environments and some of the interactions with various groups of people in the city, and telling more the story of the character of the city itself versus the Book of Wizards, which is much more focused on particular characters. And mainly it's because of what I'm doing in my sketchbook a lot right now. I'm drawing a lot of settings and environments and even vehicles. I'm drawing a lot of Gateway vehicles. So the next book, which is in the early stages right now, is going to be focused much more on. It's going to be much more like a travel guide. So, but with a twist.
We have next question from what?
New Fearless 4 story will be in Russian edition of the art book. You're writing it now, as far as we know. How does it feel? What inspire you in process? Your own art, some music, events. How does art come story in this case?
The writing process for me for the book was maybe not typical. I had definitely had the concept for the book ahead of early on. Once I laid out the book by going through my sketchbooks and gathering sketches that I thought felt like they had a similar theme. And that's when I came up with the idea of the book being focused on certain wizards and wizard factions in the city of Gateway. And so once I had that idea, I chose the art that I was most excited about working on. Then I did the art. And once the art was done, then I wrote the story about the characters. Now, I had the overall concept for what was going on in Gateway after that. During that process. So I understood the context, but I didn't know the exact details of the character stories until I was done with the art. And I let the art guide the writing. I know that's kind of backwards in terms of, how games are written, how movies are written, and how graphic novels are written, although maybe not graphic novels. I'd say it could go both ways. But it worked for me. I felt the way I like to create in terms of my process, it's easier for me to do the artwork and let the ideas come from that, and to flow out of that, because I like to create things in a way in which I'm discovering what's interesting about it as I'm doing it, as opposed to like, okay, I'm going to come up with this really cool idea and then illustrate it. It typically doesn't work for me. And I think it's just a difference in the way I work and other people work. So.
Another question from Irina Istomina-Bashkatova. She would like to know, like all of us would like to know, do you play any role-playing games now? And if you do, what games do you play?
All right, embarrassing admission. No, I don't right now. It's who knows? I mean, there's many reasons why. I don't want to place the blame on anything in particular. I think it's just mainly about this time in my life, between creating the art, teaching, freelancing, and and family time, of course. Raising a kid. It's hard to find the time to play. However, my next door neighbor at my new house down in Florida, I'm actually up in New York right now, but I live in Florida now most of the time. My next door neighbor, when he found out that I've worked on games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, he was expressing some interest in playing and wanting to get some people together to play D&D. So it's certainly possible that that's something that could start back up. And I know my son is, he's 9 now, and he's starting to become interested in gaming. He plays a lot of video games, but he's played the Pokemon card game, and we've been playing a little bit of Magic here and there. So I guess I do play a little bit of Magic and Pokemon. He always beats me. So that may be another reason why I avoid playing some games, because I always get beat. But role-playing games is not necessarily about who wins or loses; it's about the journey, right? So I will certainly probably introduce him to RPGs in the near future, and we'll see how it goes. He's much more interested in sports than I was when I was his age, so he also is balancing those things in his daily schedule. Soccer mostly, or football, sorry. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I could see myself getting back into it at some point. It's been a while, probably since college, I guess when I was in my early 20s living in New York City, I was still doing a little bit of gaming here and there. So
Next,
another question about games again. Have you ever played games that took place in the setting of Gateway?
I haven't actually, and well, I take that back. Actually, I did produce with some designer friends of mine a board game, a board and card game called Gateway Uprising, which came out 2 years ago. Other than that, I haven't played Gateway as a setting for like an RPG, but I would like to. Maybe I'll come out there and we can give it a try, sometime soon.
Okay.
Your turn?
Next, yes. Next question. On a different topic, how do you feel about fan creations? Would you be interested to know about the fan art or fan fiction on the Gateway City?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Okay, yes.
Sorry.
How do you feel about fan creations, about fan fiction, about fan art?
On Gateway.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel wonderful about it. Like I said, I've always imagined Gateway as something that I would love other people to be able to explore. That's why I had other writers write short stories, and I just told them, just pick a corner of Gateway that you would like to, explore yourself and tell me a story. I'm really waiting for the day where at one of these conventions that I go to, somebody to show up at my booth in Gateway cosplay. That'd be great. That'll let me know that I've fully arrived, in terms of the success of Gateway. But I've also had people request to do art students typically they're trying to learn 3D modeling or ZBrush. They've asked me if they could use some of my characters, as concepts for ZBrush models and stuff, and I'm always fine with it as long as they credit, as they make sure that they say where the material came from and what it's associated with. But yeah, I mean, I love that stuff. It's just like Guillermo del Toro, he's always posting fan art of his various stories and worlds. So I'm flattered by it, and if it means that it's a way for people to explore their own ideas within the city of Gateway, that helps it to make it a more rich and wonderful experience for everybody.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
And what about tabletop role-playing game based on Gateway City? Would you like to see it?
And
well,
what it should look like? Yes.
Wait, say that again. Well,
what?
The whole question, or just last part? Okay. What about tabletop role-playing game about Gateway, and would you like to see it? And if so, what should it look like?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I've been thinking about a Gateway RPG for some time. I would love for it to focus on the concept and the idea that you're mostly playing as bands of wizards that are trying to find their way to carve their niche in a city where magic is under the watchful eye of the Gateway city overlords, essentially, and that you kind of build notoriety as an outlaw wizard. So I think that's a really neat setup, and I think it's a place and it's a concept that has a lot of potential for a lot of different stories. There was a game years ago I played, because briefly I played Warhammer 40K, and it was always a mess because there's so many rules and the armies are so huge, and it was always arguing over the rules. And I remember playing a game called War Bands, Warhammer Fantasy War Bands, and it was you create these smaller armies, and it was kind of a mix between an RPG and a strategy game like 40K. And there was something about that I really enjoyed. So I've also had a concept along those lines for like a minis based game. But that's not really in the works at the moment. But it's certainly something that I've been thinking about. I'd probably start with an RPG and try to work out some of the dynamics of what that looks like. But yeah, definitely tabletop gaming. I mean, it's all, look, I mean, from the beginning, Gateway has always been the kind of project that I've wanted to sort of slowly build, starting with projects that I can handle on my own, moving into projects that may require a partner or two that are passionate about the material and are willing to do the material justice, and then just sort of slowly building that way. I've seen people try to go for the big brass ring right out of the chute and make the giant, try to go for making the big Hollywood production film, right out of the chute. And I think that if you don't have a loyal audience that you've built over time, it's harder to get people to understand why they should invest in a project like that. So, it may never happen, but maybe someday, there'll be I'll do a big, massive multiplayer online game, or, full-length feature film, or whatever. I'd be lying if I said that I don't have those fantasies. But finding other ways that are in the immediate, much more doable, with less resources, required, then I'm definitely interested. Like I said, it has to be the right time. It has to be the right partners. It has to feel like it's the right project. So, like, for instance, right now I'm working with some sculptors out of Shanghai on a line of collectibles that's based on Gateway. And these guys are extremely talented and very passionate about the material. And it took a while for them to convince me to work with them on this project, but I finally did, and it was the right thing to do. It's just I had to make sure that they were the right people to work with. So, yeah.
Okay, about... would you like... можешь по-русски сказать, что он хочет?
Ну, там как вопрос я написал по поводу косплея.
Он хочет его сделать?
Возможность, чтобы предоставить те части арта, которые не...
One professional cosplay model is from our audience question right now, and our marketing director, by the chance, asked if it is possible to acquire parts of a cosplay character that are not visible on the art, in sketches or words, so a cosplay model can be designed in 3D.
I mean, I guess, is this person asking for schematic drawings of a particular character?
Yeah.
I might have some.
Just a possibility of that.
Not a particular character by now, just a possibility. If our friends choose someone they want to make cosplay on, is it possible to see this person not only in front, but from some other sides, just in schemes? Yes.
Hey, anything's possible.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm open to all kinds of things. I'd be curious what the output of such a project would be, but it would be interesting, certainly.
Another question for that is written
one
right
minute,
now.
Please.
Yeah.
Just the last one, and skip the...
Okay. Then we have a question about board games based on Gateway. We know already had
more board games, maybe.
Yes.
And do you have any plans for more board games?
For mobile games?
No, board games.
Oh, more board games. Board games. Well, again, if it was the minis based game would probably have some board game elements, but yeah, I mean, there's no current plans in the works. Let's put it that way. But the board game that we made was sort of a combination between a deck building card game and an area control board game. And I'm actually very proud of the game. I think it just maybe because it's not a known entity and the board game world is so competitive, it was hard to find the right. It's hard to find the right way to promote the game and to get it out there and to get people interested in it. But sure. I mean, again, it sort of depends on the circumstances. The people that I worked with on the board game, they're both friends of mine, and they're both very talented designers. One of whom was the lead designer on not Rise of Nations. Sorry. There's an RTS that came out recently by Big Huge Games. I'm blanking on the name of it. Like I said, I told you this happens to me all the time. Dominations, that's what it was called. It's a RTS called Dominations. He was the lead designer on that game. But he's a busy guy, and I would love to work with him again on a project in the future. It's just not currently in the works. So,
do you have any other questions from our audience there?
Oh, some remark from Digital Wizards that a mini-based game, like a mix of board game and RPG, sounds like a job for Savage Worlds. Well, it's a huge pinnacle entertainment company in Arizona, which makes a lot of RPGs and some war games, miniature war games too.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I haven't made any commitments yet anywhere. So, but there are certainly conversations being had about the possibility of putting something like that together. And I have some concepts for what that might be like. So, who knows? It may be coming in the near future. So we'll see. I love the possibilities of RPGs and board games and card games. It's a very exciting world. I think the issue for me is just that I'm not currently steeped in that world so much that I would consider myself an expert. So it's another one of these cases where I would feel as if I'd need the right partners. I have my own concepts for how I would like the world to be presented and what kinds of quests I would like people to be able to go on. And it's I have thoughts about how to make it unique in terms of other RPGs. The biggest thing, like I said, is just making sure that the experience feels like a genuine gateway experience and not like some other RPG rule set that then is. That's a great way to sort of start with it and experiment. Is like taking an existing rule set and then using gateway as a setting. But I would like to think that there are maybe some experiences that could be had in terms of an RPG experience that are only possible in a setting like Gateway. So, if that makes any sense at all.
Do you have any other questions there? I have one question from me.
Sure.
When we were announcing Gateway, there were several questions from other people who saw just the title, and they were asking if it was Sigil, City of Doors, or something connected with it. It is one of my favorite settings, and so I would like to ask you if it is somehow connected with it as well.
All right, so there's kind of a long story, sort of a long story about the name for Gateway. A long time ago, when I told you I was first sort of developing this concept for Gateway, I had this idea that in a fantasy setting, how could you have the kind of situation like in Star Wars, like in the Mos Eisley Cantina, where you have all these different creatures from all kinds of different planets coming to this one place. And space travel makes things go, especially if you can travel fast at the speed of light, you can travel to places really quickly. Whereas in a fantasy setting, all travel is sort of dependent on geography. And so initially, I had this concept, this idea that Gateway would be a city full of doors, full of magical doorways that people would come through, and from all over the known world, from places not even right from far-flung continent one had ever heard of. And to some extent, I don't think that that idea is completely out the window in terms of the current version of what the city of Gateway is like. The only thing is, I would say that I think when I started to sort of try to figure out the logistics of a world in which you could just go through these gateways and go, immediately to one place or another, it presented too many problems in my mind narratively. It made a city like Gateway too easy to sort of take over from outside elements. It made it sort of impossible to it made it impractical to have any other sort of forms of transportation or things like barges on rivers and things like that, which I still wanted that kind of element. So I think certainly there are wizards that could use these kinds of magical gateways to transport themselves between Gateway and other places, but instead the idea of Gateway became more about it's a gateway sort of to the world of magic, to the world of spirituality, and to the world of commerce. And because it's a city that happens to be sort of located in a place where all these magical ley lines of energy come together. It's also a place where a lot of the mythology of the origin story of the world happen to be in this mountain range that's nearby. And it also just happens to be ideal geographically for trade with other nations and continents. And so it's just sort of this perfect, perfect storm, I guess you could say, of a place to put a city. And initially in the history of Gateway, it was actually several individual cities that eventually came together under these, I guess you could call them sort of founding wizards of the city. So the name Gateway just became kind of a metaphor for what I think all cities are, which is sort of a gateway to ideas and culture and humanity. Hopefully in that way it kind of makes sense. There's no literal gateway. There's certainly lots of maybe arches and gates and ceremonial, things like that throughout the city. But I'd say the name is more of a metaphor than anything.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions? No? So...
I've answered all the questions.
Yes. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Yeah. Well, was that good? I mean, did everybody enjoy that?
Yes.
Everybody's still thinking about the horse story. Well, it was great. I mean, this is a great opportunity, and I'm really excited to see how the audience in Russia, how well they connect with the material, and hopefully this is just the start of lots of gateway products in Russia. And I know I've been talking with Alexander about the idea of coming out to Russia for a convention or something sometime in the near future. So it'd be nice to meet everybody in person.
And meet a cosplayer with a gateway.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe what I should do is I should let everyone know I'm coming, and we could have a gateway cosplay contest. Great.
That would be great.
I'd love that.
Oh yeah.
So we can say bye to the audience.
Yeah, we can
Yes.
say goodbye to our audience. Спасибо, что были с нами.
Okay. All right, goodbye, audience.
Bye. Yes. Вот это вот, подписывайтесь на наш Patreon, и вот это все, что должен говорить Тринити.
Главное, поддерживайте город Врат, и сейчас вы увидите ссылку и музыку, которой, правда, нет гитвы.
Ну, пусть
Oh,
так.
hey, can I ask, what's the cat's name?
Что? Can you
What's
repeat?
the cat's name? The cat
Cat's
has been
name, oh,
there
cat's
the
name
whole
is
time.
Manitou. And should we sing shut off the stream by now?
Yeah, okay.
Окей.
Okay, goodbye.